Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather tonight. We are honored to bring weather information to you in your part of Alaska, and we thank all of our partners for helping us to get this message to you across the state. As always, you can find more information online at weather.gov/Alaska. Call the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. And you can find information on Facebook and Twitter there, and also on YouTube if you'd like a short and condensed version of what you're watching here tonight, a little bit earlier in the afternoon, about 3:45 or so. You should be able to find it on YouTube or on our weather page, weather.gov/Alaska. Just click on the TV Weather Maps link, and you can get the statewide weather brief, the same thing that you hear on the radio in many parts of Alaska as well, but with the surface weather maps that you're about to see here. If you can't find what you're looking for, I've got questions about the TV show, have suggestions for improvements or things that you just can't stand to see anymore, please let me know. I'm happy to serve you any way I can. David.Snider@noaa.gov is how you find me anytime. Let's take a look at what's going on around the state here. Tonight we are seeing snow and blowing snow across the west coast. That is going to continue to move north and east into some of our west coast communities and gradually improve. So conditions that you're seeing now should get better for a brief amount of time tonight and into tomorrow, because another wave is moving in early Friday, and as we get into the afternoon hours, conditions will worsen once again across the west coast from the Kuskokwim Delta northward through the Bering Strait and the western Arctic coast. In fact, we're expecting near blizzard conditions in many areas, especially possible from about the Yukon Delta through Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, and northward there. Wind and snow are going to be an issue. And of course, coastal flooding and high surf is on everybody's mind, as it has been for the last week or so. We're watching that very carefully. Don't be surprised to see new information from the National Weather Service in Fairbanks and probably from the National Weather Service in Anchorage for our West Coast communities there, talking about the potential anyway for coastal flooding and some high surf there where the ice is thinned out. That is certainly a concern, and we are watching that very carefully with your community in mind. So stay tuned. We will have more information probably as early as tonight, maybe as late as tomorrow morning as we wrap up the current round of snow. And that's what we have on the map tonight. We have winter weather advisories for St. Lawrence Island, the western end of the Seward Peninsula, Yukon Delta down to the Kuskokwim Delta, especially around Nunivak Island, and the Baldwin Peninsula area around Kotzebue. And what you see up north is a wind chill advisory for these regions, at least through noontime tomorrow. We expect the wind chill value to be as cold as 50 below. And that means if you're going outside and you're not dressed and ready for the conditions there, 10 minutes or less is what it takes for frostbite to occur. So absolutely be careful. Have a plan. Make sure someone knows where you're going if you have to be out, and to get back inside super quick. Kotzebue Sound, it looks like the upper end there. We're still looking at some snow and blowing snow. Most of this is going to be winding down as you're watching the show tonight. We expect to see conditions improving as we go into the mid to late evening hours there. We'll move into that lull before we start to see conditions worsen again as we get into the midday and afternoon hours of your Friday. So everything on the west coast that you have now, as that snow band is working through, again, should be improving. But this is what it looks like in Nome this afternoon, the FAA aviation weather camera there. We certainly appreciate our partners there at the FAA, and those cameras are invaluable, and we love to look at them. We can gaze around Alaska all day long. We know you do too, but this afternoon, that's what conditions look like there, and we expect that to get better for Friday morning before it gets worse again for Friday night. Here's a look at what's going on with the satellite picture. You can see southeast, just kind of on the tail end of low pressure here across the Pacific Northwest. Clouds are just kind of sloshing over some of the mountains there, but overall, it looks like you'll move into a period of clearing with the wind. Though the wind's still going to be an issue as we head through tonight and tomorrow. Around South Central, just a beautifully sunny day. The clouds that you see painted on this image are really the satellite just picking up that cold air that we talk about sometimes. The real cloud cover is right here along this band. This is the wave that's working through southwest, the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound region, and the western Arctic coast. That's bringing you the wind, the snow, and probably some poor visibility, just like what we saw there in Nome. Here's the break. And then here's the next storm. So let's put this in motion one more time, and you can see how that's just kind of quickly moving in. One wave, and here's the next one. This is going to move pretty quickly. Again, you've got about a half day of clearing. So if you've got to get something done tomorrow on the West Coast, it's morning time. Get it done in the morning through about lunchtime tomorrow. You'll have that break in place and should have reasonably better weather than what you can expect as we get into Friday night and Saturday, maybe as late as Sunday as well. So this wave is going to keep on coming. Here's the weather map. Cold, high pressure up here across the northern parts of Yukon. It's pushing that cold air south toward the southeast archipelago. And because of that, it's draining a lot of that wind right through Lynn Canal, through Stevens Passage. We've had some pretty good gusts there, about 50 to 60 miles per hour there at least. Storm warning there for Lynn Canal through tonight, I believe. And there is going to be some freezing spray, so keep that in mind if you are going out. Hopefully not in a storm warning, but yeah, if you're going out, do expect to see some freezing spray in the region, even if the winds let up a little bit. So conditions will improve, but not in a good way for the Lynn Canal or Stevens Passage, at least tonight. Some of that may work its way down the Chatham Strait as well. Out to the west, here is our storm. The front is working toward the Bering Strait over St. Lawrence Island, the Yukon Delta, and the Kuskokwim right now. And as it does that, the crossed arrows, of course, mean blowing snow. As you look southward, the triple point, the part where the warm air, the cold air, and that overrunning section taking shape, working in through the western Gulf of Alaska, and we have a deep southerly flow working over the Aleutians as we go through tonight. And you can see very quickly that breaks apart into another piece. So we have that main front, the one that's falling apart tonight, working up through the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound. High pressure starts to creep westward into the central Tanana Valley and into the upper Koyukuk Valley, and that tightens that pressure gradient again across southeast. So the winds are going to stay with you as we head through tonight. That's where the storm warning is going to stay in place. Out west, areas of light snow will start to taper off, and then here's the break working through Nunivak Island overnight, St. Matthew, St. Lawrence Island. You still have a steady south flow, but the precipitation and the really bad visibility at least should improve somewhat. Now, as we get into tonight, a 960 low will move north of Adak and Atka, and another wave working across the chain will work quickly inland as we get into Friday afternoon. You can see that front working its way into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta, moving past Bethel, moving past Amonic up toward Hooper Bay, getting close to Unalakleet by the end of the day. Probably not quite to Nome. You're going to have that steady south flow, though, and it is going to be snowing. But the winds will probably keep picking up as you move in through the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue and Shishmaref as we get through Friday night and into Saturday. So everyone up here in the west is still going to have to deal with some of the worst weather as we get into Friday night and Saturday. For southeast, it looks like a generally clear day. Notice how those isobars, the lines of constant pressure, have kind of spread apart a little bit, and that means that wind should also improve a little bit. It won't be quite as windy as we go into Friday there for many of our northern and central panhandle friends. For the Alaska Peninsula here, that front working its way just south of Kodiak Island. Looks like rain generally to the south and west of Kodiak. Central and western parts of the chain still dealing with a little bit of that mixed precipitation, and you're getting it into a little bit more showery weather here across the southern and western Bering as we get into Friday. Most of south central. The east will generally be clear. I wouldn't be real surprised if we see some areas of patchy fog there. It is going to be mighty cold here across the Copper River Valley. Temperatures probably dropping into the teens, maybe close to minus 20. So cold stuff for sure. Clouds will be building in here across the Brooks Range. And once again, that wind chill advisory is still going to be in effect at least until noon. Don't be surprised to see that get extended beyond that and into Saturday or Sunday. Saturday's weather. High pressure is still trying to hold on to the upper Yukon Valley. It's going to start to weaken a little bit more. The core of that cold is moving southward across northern parts of British Columbia and still pushing a lot of air into southeast, but the bulk of that push will have already happened, and it's going to start spending more energy moving south and east into the lower 48 in western Canada. So that's going to make room for everything you see out here. Low pressure working across the eastern chain, the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, sends another surge of warmer air northward. That could mix some precipitation outside of Prince William Sound, but pretty much everyone is going to be dealing with snow north of Homer there. It doesn't look like a lot of snow at this point, but it looks like enough that you might notice. Might make the roads a little slick if you're driving around, so just be careful on the road system as we go into Saturday and the first part of the weekend. Out across the west, a little bit of a different story. We're going to have a little bit more of a west and southwesterly flow, and we've just opened the door now to all the effects of that strong south and westerly flow with areas of snow, and we've got our crossed arrows here. We're talking about conditions that could reach almost blizzard level there. So we're at least talking about visibility down to a half mile and blowing snow and certainly cold weather there. If it gets down to a quarter mile or less, that's when we start to talk about blizzard conditions, and it's going to be really close to that level there, which means travel is going to be difficult. It doesn't matter if we call it a winter weather advisory or a blizzard. The real truth is that it's going to be difficult for you to move around. It's going to be hard to fly and certainly pretty dangerous to be out there on the boat. So be extra careful there on Saturday as we go through. And weather will gradually improve in the south on Sunday, and that improvement will gradually move northward. But the west coast, all the way up toward Point Hope, Point Lay, Wainwright, certainly Kotzebue, and westward Shishmaref may still be dealing with this by Saturday night, so keep an eye on that. Low pressure is going to track north and east here as we go into your weekend. Let's take a quick look at temperatures. It is going to be cold. Remember, we have that big bubble of high pressure here across the northern Yukon, and that is just dropping temps here across the Beaufort Seacoast. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse looking at temps around 30 below or even colder. For the upper Yukon, 24 below there in Fort Yukon. Fairbanks down to about 20 below. Norton Sound temperatures on the plus side of 0, 6 to about 12 above, 2 above in Shish, 23 for St. Lawrence Island, Gamble, and Savunga. Teens there around Bristol Bay, King Salmon, and Dillingham, down toward Sand Point in the mid to upper 30s. Cold Bay, False Pass, King Cove, all looking at temps just above freezing. Unalaska about 38, 34 in St. Paul. Southeastern temperatures are going to be cold, teens and 20s there. Another round of colder air that you haven't had for at least a couple days anyway. Talkeetna could drop to about 4 below, about 5 above in Anchorage, and 10 for Homer. High temps there tomorrow, 28. Fairbanks 1 below, 7 below in Utqiagvik, 12 below for Kaktovik, 27 above in Nome, 30s for Southwest, 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, King Cove and about 43, 20s and 30s for a good chunk of Southeast, Shemmy about 42. Overnight lows again on Saturday. Bitter cold, 25 below in Fort Yukon, 28 below for Arctic Village, and high temperatures there on Saturday recover to about 7 below, 31 in Nome, Fairbanks 13 above, and 24 in Anchorage.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. With the next wave building into the southern Bering Sea, we're going to see IFR spreading into St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, the Yukon Delta, into the Kuskokwim Delta. Some breaks in that pattern a little bit around Bristol Bay as the flow kind of splits off and moves a section into the Gulf and moves the rest of that warm and wet air northward. And you can see a little bit of a IFR start out across the western Bering for southeast. Generally VFR conditions there, though turbulence may be an issue as we're draining a lot of cold and Arctic air through some of the canals there, so just because it's clear doesn't mean it's a go all the way around. You can see that next Bering Sea wave working ashore into the Kuskokwim and Yukon deltas there, and also into the windward side of the Aleutian chain and into Kodiak Island. IFR conditions will be fairly widespread in those areas, just as it has been for on and off all week long, and marginal conditions will fill in the gaps there where you don't have IFR. Look for MVFR to be fairly widespread in the west, all the way from Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky, and west toward Shemya, and also across the western side of the North Slope, the western Arctic coast, more particularly, especially from Wainwright down to about Point Hope. You'll see some building MVFR just offshore of central and southern southeast outer coast, but most of the inside passages will remain VFR through Saturday morning. Look for IFR to wrap into Kodiak Island and over the Barrens, starting to nudge up toward Homer, but not quite. Almost to Resurrection Bay. Marginal conditions develop over Cook Inlet and most of the Kenai Peninsula, and IFR will also spread over the Kotzebue Sound region and pass through during Saturday morning and move into the Kobuk and Noatak valleys in the upper Koyukuk. And across the west, IFR is likely to start Saturday morning for St. Paul and St. George. And as we get into the afternoon, that progresses eastward a little bit more, filling in around Prince William Sound all the way down through the Resurrection Bay coastline, also through the Kodiak Island region, Shelikof Strait, and up the eastern side now of the Alaska Range. So passes like Lake Clark and Merrill Pass up toward Rainy Pass will start to go down as you get into the afternoon on Saturday. And the upslope side of the south and western Brooks Range there, so the southern side will start to develop the IFR conditions as conditions lower there around the south-facing coastlines of the Seward Peninsula down into the Bering Strait communities and St. Lawrence Island, all as that weather moves in, but it will be milder, just the conditions will go down. Anaktuvik Pass, looking to probably lean over toward MVFR as we go through your daytime tomorrow, but a VFR start is likely, and it doesn't look like that quite makes it to Adigan Pass as we go through Friday, so you might want to err on the side of the eastern passes there if you're going to cut it close. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see VFR, and really most of the Alaska Range tomorrow should be VFR all the way around the Horn. Windy Pass, VFR conditions for there, and for Isabel Pass looking pretty good. Now the further east you go, you're going to start to getting into some much colder air. VFR from Antasta, though we wouldn't be surprised to see some marginal, if not IFR conditions with fog around parts of the Copper River Valley. As you get into Tanita Pass, we expect that to be okay. But looking south and east from Portage Pass after VFR there, Chilkoot and White Pass, while VFR, keep in mind that turbulence may be a big issue as a lot of that colder air is draining through. Freezing levels show that southerly surge bringing that warmer air up into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Levels there as high as 6,000 feet. The surface freezing line starting to nudge up into the southwest coast and lingering right across the outer coast of southeast tomorrow, but the bulk of the interior and of course south central and southwest will be sub-freezing to start. Icing potential tells us that by the afternoon, with warm air spreading in, really a lot of the air that's sitting near the surface is fairly dry. So the levels that you have to get to find moisture or ice or icing potential is pretty high up there. And it looks like it's somewhere between about 5,000 and 10,000 feet from the Bering Strait to about 10,000 feet as you get into Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, and down toward the Alaska Peninsula. But you can see it drops off fairly quickly there after that next wave passes through. A lot of colder air and wraparound moisture starts to build in closer to the surface. Up around the Brooks Range and North Slope above 5,000 feet there, and really not any significant concern right now over the Gulf of Alaska or southeast. Here's the jet stream. Ridge of high pressure is the story of the week. A strong southwest flow blasting into western Alaska there, 140 to 150 knots. Descending cold air just grazing southeast there, and again that's going to support those windy conditions across southeast. 10 to 25 knots at 9,000 feet for you out of the northwest. Here's our ridge across western parts of Alaska and that driving west and southwesterly flow up the west coast, 40 to 50 knots there, and at about 3,000 feet you can see a similar pattern, 40 to 55 knots. The strongest winds here right across the west coast, the Yukon Delta and the central and eastern chain. Our ridge across the midsections giving us light winds for the interior and a north and westerly wind through southeast. So turbulence really going to focus out west. There is going to be at least some considerable moderate across southeast below 6,000 feet. Could reach some isolated severe, but the focus for strongest and most severe turbulence probably in the west coast tomorrow.
Happy birthday, Galileo!
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dehne Regis, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. We're so nerdy here at Stargazers that we have favorite astronomers.
Hey, speak for yourself. I'm not that, yeah, who am I kidding? I am that nerdy.
And our most favorite astronomer has a birthday this week.
Galileo Galilei, telescope pioneer, prover of the heliocentric system, observer of the mountains on the moon, sunspots, phases of Venus, moons of Jupiter, and ears of Saturn.
Ears?
Well, he thought so. And Galileo would be 455 years old this year.
And we want to show you how you can recreate his observations from your own backyard.
Let's show you. Galileo was born on February 15th, 1564 in Pisa, Italy. The night he was born, the planet Venus was visible just after sunset in the west with a crescent moon up above it. Over in the east, the planets Jupiter and Saturn were making a nice little conjunction. Galileo would grow up to study these four objects extensively with his homemade telescopes.
Galileo didn't even invent the telescope, but legend has it an assistant merely told him what one looked like, and Galileo built one himself in under 24 hours. Okay, we now have our sky set up for February 15th of this year at 7:30 p.m. looking high in the southeast. There's the moon to the left of Orion. You should see the moon every night this week since it'll be in its waxing phases.
Imagine being one of the first people to look through a telescope. You would see wonders no human eye had ever seen. When Galileo looked through his telescope at the moon, he saw something like this. He remarked, "It is like the face of the earth itself, which is marked here and there with chains of mountains and depths of valleys."
Now we're facing southeast just before sunrise. We can see three planets that Galileo studied over 400 years ago. The second brightest planet, higher in the sky, is Jupiter.
When he looked at Jupiter up close, Galileo saw something completely unexpected. 4 stars always seemed to hang around it in a line. On certain days, there would be 1 on one side and 3 on the other. Sometimes they were split, 2 and 2, and other times they were 4 on the same side.
Galileo figured out that these were moons that orbit the giant planet. After watching them for only one season, he computed their orbits. Io goes around Jupiter every 42 hours, Europa circles around every 3.5 days, Ganymede takes a little over 7 days, and Callisto orbits once in a little under 17 days.
Next up, let's identify Venus. She's easy to find since she's the brightest star-like object in the sky.
When Galileo looked at Venus through his telescope, he saw that it wasn't a perfect circle. It has a phase like the moon. And as he watched it month after month, the phase changed.
Not only that, but when Venus was a crescent, it was larger than it was almost full.
Aha! This was proof that Venus went around the sun, not around the Earth. It got larger and more crescent-shaped when it was closer to us and nearly between us and the sun.
And it was fuller and smaller when on the opposite side of the sun. Saturn is also up in the morning sky this February. It's that fainter point of light just below Venus.
Galileo's telescope wasn't quite good enough to see Saturn clearly. As he squinted and squinted, he did notice something strange in the image.
He wrote in his journal, "Saturn has ears."
What he was seeing, just barely, were Saturn's rings. To him, they looked like ears sticking out of Saturn's face. It took another 50 years for astronomers to realize those ears were actually rings.
So, in honor of Galileo's 455th birthday, we have the waxing moon in the evening sky.
And Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn just before dawn.
And if you have a telescope, aim it at these four objects and pretend you're Galileo, seeing the wonders of the universe for the first time. Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Now onto your marine weather. You'll see a generous ice pack here across the northern sections of the Bering and into the Chukchi, but remember that this is not thickness, this is just concentration, and the concentration, while fairly widespread and above 80%, isn't all that thick. So we could see further reduction in that ice with two waves still working through, one tonight and another one coming up as we head into Friday afternoon and again on to Saturday. So any ice here, especially from Eetolen Strait down toward the southwest, is going to be highly variable and change a lot, and probably at least this ice edge here north of St. Matthew will undergo some changes as well. For the very latest information, you can always head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Click on the map there, zoom in, check out the concentrations, and see the forecast there as well as the seasonal outlook. Across southeast, northerly winds across Lynn Canal will gust up to 55 knots tomorrow, so there certainly will be some some gales in the region and probably pushing that storm force level there with the gusts. 15 to 30 knots sustained across Stevens Passage and southward into Clarence Strait. Out of the north, 3 to 6 foot seas there, 8 foot seas in the Lynn Canal. And then northwesterlies coming down south of Sitka, 25 to 30 knots, up to 11 foot seas there, and offshore winds blowing out of Yakutat and out of Cross Sound. Again, it could be some stronger gusts in those gaps too, so plan on that. We've seen gusts in the region today in the 50 and 60 mile an hour range, so certainly windy. Same conditions really on Saturday. It might ease up a little bit more, but as you move southward here and the high move southward, we may redirect that flow a little bit more into Stevens Passage, so watch for more gusts southward as you go into Saturday. And Clarence Strait, you're probably looking at more of a northeasterly wind, maybe some gusts in the gaps as usual. And certainly those outflow winds still be possible across the outer coast with about 6 to 8 foot seas there. Easterlies around Yakutat, 15 knots with 6 foot seas. Across south central, northerlies gusty out of the gaps again around the Prince William Sound region, 30 knots there with a 4 foot sea. Gust to 45 out of the Copper River Delta. 20 knots sustained, those 6 foot seas there. And north and easterlies coming down Cook Inlet. Northerlies in the western Barrens, 25 knots with 7 foot seas. That picks up out of Resurrection Bay, or out of Kashamak Bay, I should say. Northeasterlies, 30 knots and 9 foot seas. And a broad east and southeasterly flow coming into the northern Gulf, about 25 to 30. Northeasterlies in Prince William Sound, still holding at 20 knots with 4 foot seas. Northeasterlies in northern Cook Inlet, also about the same. For the Alaska Peninsula, we're looking at east and southeasterly winds for the Bering Sea coast, 30 to 40 with 6 to 13 foot seas. Across Kodiak Island, look for northeasterlies in Shelikof Strait. A little bit more of a southerly flow working its way across Akiak down towards Sand Point, and 8 to 13 foot seas are expected. Excuse me. Northeasterlies coming down through the Bering Strait on or through the Bristol Bay region. For Saturday, you're looking at about 7 to 14 foot seas. going into the beginning of the weekend. And there's that south flow we were talking about, 15 to 17 foot seas as we go into Saturday, 11 foot seas east of Kodiak and strong northeasterlies inside of Shelikof Strait. And then you look at the Bering, you can see the highest winds and seas are well north of the region. West and southwesterlies will continue 35 to about 45 knots. Seas as high as 23 to 25 feet from about Adak toward Kiska. As you get into Saturday, conditions improve. We're still looking about high winds and seas out across the Bering. But west and northwesterlies will continue across Nikolsky on Alaska, Dutch Harbor, about 14 to 15 foot seas for the Pacific. You'll see slightly higher seas in the west, 17 and 19 foot seas from Kiska down towards Shemya. For the west coast now, again, we're watching the threat for coastal flooding and high surf, and we will continue to update you there, especially on the web, on the website, the radio, and certainly on Facebook and Twitter. So make sure you're watching that tonight and tomorrow. Just got news that a blizzard watch has been issued for the Kuskokwim Delta region, including coastal areas from Bethel west and north toward Macoriac and Nunivak Island up toward Hooper Bay. Look for a south and easterly flow, 40 to 50 knots, 14 to 27 foot seas, the highest of which will be around St. Matthew there. So that's going to generally graze St. Paul and St. George and probably move over St. Matthew. As we get into Saturday, that diminishes just a little bit of west and south flow, about 25 to 35. I look for up to 23 foot seas closer to the ice edge there with that south wind. South winds coming into Nome as well, 30 knots over Norton Sound. And east and southeasterly winds over the Beaufort and down the Chukchi coast, 15 to 30, all blowing offshore. A little bit of a change up across the Beaufort seacoast, but winds come up to 40 knots there around Cape Lisburn and Point Hope on Saturday. Once again, one wave of weather is working across the west coast right now. Conditions should improve as we go through tonight, but a blizzard watch has just been issued and expect conditions to reach at least winter weather advisory with visibility down to a half mile and snow falling across the region. Watch for more information as we get into tonight and tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.